If you were to ask me what side characters in the Gundam series you would like to get an entire story written of and a movie adaptation, the last person I would give you is Hathaway Noah. This is a character that I was absolutely frustrated with in his appearance in the series, essentially getting somebody killed and then ultimately killing somebody who was trying to save him, but that's just my perspective. But even still, I was excited for Hathaway's Flash. This is a series a story that I technically was kind of interested in actually reading, and to find out that the entire trilogy book series is getting a trilogy movie adaptation, I'm all over it. Thankfully, really quickly brought over to the West by Netflix. This is a currently streaming movie that you can check out right now, but this is my review on the movie itself, so let's jump into it. Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway Flash is a 3-movie trilogy, so unfortunately there's not too much to get into with this first movie review, just because the idea that, one, it's a movie, so it's a little more difficult to get into, but two, we don't really have much of a conclusion nor a build-up in the story itself. I think that's kind of the first difficulty I really do face in talking about this series, is that this is a introduction, really. It's a very much a character introduction movie, so it's going to be a hard sell in that regard. Now, still, there is a lot to be seen in this movie, and I think visually there was a lot of really cool spectacle points in the movie itself. But essentially, it opens up 12 years after Char's rebellion. This is a UC 105 time period, and we really quickly follow Hathaway Noah, who is currently on a vessel heading for Earth, and he is on a vessel with several other politicians of the Earth Federation force. And this vessel is really quickly hijacked by a group that call themselves Mafti. And Mafti currently is assassinating different cabinet members of the Earth Federation force. And as the time goes on, you'll kind of learn about the fact that the goal of Mafti really is to really kind of save Earth, because mankind is overpopulating it and causing pollution. And at some point during this hijacking, Hathaway being there kind of springs into action and kind of helps them resolve the issue itself. And this continues on as there's an investigation, obviously put into play because of what happened on that spacecraft. And during this time period, Hathaway Noah meets 2 key individuals, one being Andalusia Gigi and one being Kenneth Slegg. And Kenneth Slegg is kind of a key thing here because he is actually a colonel with the Earth Federation. Well, Andalusia is kind of an oddity. You don't really know what she's from. You obviously know that she is involved with somebody with power, because getting on that particular vessel required, some string to be pulled, because there was a lot of politicians on it. But ultimately, the question mark comes up of why is this young 20-year-old girl who has no political ties on this vessel? Who does she know? What is she? Who is she? And as the story goes along, you'll learn more about Andalusia and Kenneth, and essentially more about Mafti and what they're doing, and essentially why there's kind of this support of Mafti. There's a lot of people that support what Mafti's doing, because what it seems like is that the Earth Federation is pretty much holding the entire Earth with an iron fist. They're throwing a lot of money around. They're storming the streets and shooting randomly at buildings. They seem to have too much control for their own good. So there's a huge support for what Mafti's doing, but ultimately the question does come, who is Mafti and why are they doing what they're doing? So starting off visually, I thought this movie looked fantastic. Now, this is kind of a continuation of Sunrise's style with their movies and their OVAs recently. I point mainly to Mobile Suit Gundam: The Origin. I thought that was a beautifully animated OVA. The only criticism I really give with this particular series is around the Gundam fights themselves. There was 2 main key set pieces for the combat sequences with Gundams and mobile suits. And that was really the first one, which was where Hathaway is on the streets and you're seeing a mobile suit fight. And then there was the second one, which was the main, climax fight that happens at the end. And while visually I could kind of see what was going on with the first one, they're both technically taking place at more of a dark time. They're really nighttime set pieces. And that unfortunately is detrimental to it itself, because it was kind of hard to see what was really going on. It was very much, the contrast wasn't there. You couldn't really see the mobile suits. You couldn't really see the Gundams themselves. Well, granted, with the first one, you got a lot of contrast through the explosions and the cityscapes themselves. The second one was more detrimental. I really had a problem with visually seeing what was going on, and the stylizing, the directing choices they made with that second fight kind of left it anticlimactic. It wasn't really a good fight. But the first one, like I said, was fantastic, and I think that's because they pulled off what they pulled off was giving a really fantastic sense of the scale of these mobile suits and the fight that was happening. I cannot say enough, but that was probably one of the best kind of portrayals of a Gundam mobile suit fight I've ever seen. I harken back to a lot of the previous Gundam series where they have combat in more enclosed residential areas. And what Gundam does really well sometimes is presenting that in some way. I mean, one example being there was one scene, I forget exactly which Gundam series it was, where the shell casing of a bullet falls to the ground and it literally crushes people. That sense of scale, that sense of how minute and how small and fragile mankind becomes when it's standing next to one of these mobile suits. And I think, like I said, I think this particular fight, this first fight that you have where Hathaway is fleeing from this building and you're seeing him kind of running around and explosions are happening. Usually with like these mobile suits, when they're, when you're watching them themselves, what you'll see is they fire, and in the distance you'll see like a couple explosions. You'll see the bullet striking the ground in the distance. But you never see like the scale of that until you see it from the perspective of people on the ground. Suddenly things like, the sparks and the debris from like a laser gun or something like that hits the ground and it sets fire to the grass. And from the perspective of people on the ground, that's huge. It's massive. There's gigantic holes being, thrown into the ground. And the way they portray this particular scene was so well done. You see that scale, you see that massiveness, you see the direction of the camera placed. That gives you that sense of fear that you're kind of seeing from these characters. You kind of feel it as you're watching it. And I think that was, if you don't get anything from this movie, I think that particular set piece was brilliantly done. I mean, there's a certain point which somebody's being impaled and you see this really cool effect of almost like a fireworks effect, but it's tragic at the same time. It was just so well done. I cannot state enough how much I love that particular scene. Story-wise is difficult, like I said, to really get into because unfortunately, this being the first of 3 parts, there's not much to go by so far. And that's where the big downer is going to be for even suggesting the movie, is it's the fact that it's a kind of a hard sell when you don't really know where it's going or if it's even going to get to anything. It is an opening. It is a introduction. This literally introduces Hathaway himself. It introduces, well, not necessarily introducing Hathaway if you've seen him in the previous content, but more of Hathaway as he is now. This Andalusia girl and this colonel. It's really kind of focused around kind of introducing them as characters, getting to know them, and also like the people that are around Mafti themselves, who the Mafti organization is, what the Earth Federation is doing now, why people find them revolting, how they're abusing their powers, and everything other than that's not really there yet. We're not there in the story yet to really get into. And I think that's kind of the bummer. It is similar to things like Thunderbolt. Mobile Suit Gundam Thunderbolt is pretty much a similar case. The first movie is an introduction, and there's not much story there yet. So that's really going to be the biggest struggle. And I think it's really going to be a struggle only for people that aren't Gundam fans. Because even with people that are Gundam fans, you're going to still find stuff here. You're going to find references here. You're going to enjoy seeing your characters again. Well, at least with Hathaway. You're going to enjoy seeing these characters. You're going to enjoy that world itself still. And it's the setup that you're excited for. I'm excited to see what's going to happen in the further episodes. For me personally, I'm not a gigantic Gundam fan, but I have watched pretty much everything. My enjoyment for this series was really around the spectacle, the visuals, and really kind of a question mark as to what the heck is Hathaway doing? Like, what is his goals here? What is his driving force? And ultimately, what is Mafta? And what is Mafta doing? That's really the big question mark that I have. Is Unicorn Gundam technically prior to this, but technically Char's Rebellion doesn't give me enough sense, and maybe I missed something of how do we get to this point? What brought us here? And again, I'm not sure if that's something they're going to get into later, but I did find myself, even though I have watched all this stuff, maybe it's been too long, that I almost don't feel I understand how we got to here. I mean, I can draw my own conclusions. I can obviously infer how we got here, but I don't ultimately see the connecting points all being there. But I also did enjoy a lot of the connections they made to the previous stuff. They had a lot of points where Hathaway kind of gives these brief moments of recalling his previous experiences. I mean, obviously the biggest one is Quest. He dwells on Quest quite a bit, and of course Quest was this girl that Hathaway did fall in love with in the previous series, and he's still kind of struggling with that. With his dealings with Andalusia, he definitely does kind of recall Quest quite a bit. And what was kind of surprising to me is that he never dwells on kind of what happened in that situation, because like I said before, my frustration with Hathaway was really him killing somebody that essentially tried to save his life. And it's surprising that he doesn't dwell on that too much. He dwells a lot on Quest, but he doesn't dwell on his technical murder. But it does kind of address the idea that he is essentially a child soldier, or at least a child that was involved with military stuff, and his accomplishments, even though they were against what the current time Federation didn't want, technically saved a lot of people. But that's ultimately where I sit. I did enjoy this movie. It was a lot of fun. Music was amazing. Swana Hiroyuki, Andrew's obviously going to love it to death. But not just that. I think the music did really well in really enhancing this movie. A lot of the ambient music was fantastic. A lot of the sound effects were fantastic. Like I said, a lot of the portrayal of certain scenes in combat and how it affects the people around them. The citizen perspective visually was fantastic. It was just a visually pleasing and fantastically directed movie itself. Just, I think, like I said, the only downplay I really give it is that this is an introduction, and that's all it really is. And so we're not really going to get into the meat and potatoes quite yet. It's going to be in the later movies. Hopefully they don't take too long to get out, because I'm looking forward to really kind of concluding the story. But yeah, just a fantastic movie, besides the fact that it is technically one of 3, and you're going to have to keep that in mind going into it. But that's my thoughts on Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway, or Hathaway Flash. Definitely check that out if that's interesting to you. And I hope you guys enjoyed this review. If you did, leave a like down below. Comment, let me know what you thought of the movie. If you're a big, huge Gundam fan, please don't bash me too much. But yeah, subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video if you can, and y'all take care.